My name is Thomas David Kehoe. I'm the owner of Casa Futura Technologies, for 25 years now, the leading manufacturer of technology for treating stuttering. I'm going to be talking about evidence-based treatments for stuttering. I stutter, so I'm going to be using this small talk device, which makes me talk fluently and makes it easier for me to talk. If you prefer to read rather than watch a video, what I'm going to talk about is from my free ebook, 5 Ways to Treat Stuttering, which is on my website. First of all, what is evidence-based treatment? What I mean by this is treatments that have been proven effective in a scientific study published in a peer-reviewed journal. And when I talk about stuttering treatments, let's clear up something here. There are plenty of people out there who will tell you that there's no cure for stuttering, there's nothing you can do, you're just going to have to learn to live with it. I've had PhD speech-language pathologists, stuttering experts to tell me this, tell me that I will never be able to talk fluently. This is not true. Stuttering is a treatable neurological disorder. I'm going to be talking about 5 evidence-based effective treatments. Before we get started on the treatments, let's talk about what stuttering is on a neurological level. The brain imaging that's been coming out over the last 25 years has found 2 or 3 major neurological abnormalities associated with stuttering. There have been other neurological abnormalities, but these are the main ones. The first is overactive speech motor processing. What this means is that stutters move their muscles too much. So when I stutter, you can see that my muscles are moving too much. This is as opposed to Parkinson's, where there's too little muscle movement. So a Parkinson's patient would talk like this. The other neurological abnormality, that's underactive auditory processing. In other words, there's something wrong with how stutterers hear our voices, or in particular, something wrong with how we integrate how we hear our voices with how we feel our muscles moving. And we're going to see that most of the effective stuttering treatments either reduce the overactivity in the speech motor control area or increase the underactivity in the auditory processing area. Now, a third neurological abnormality is dopamine. My particular interest is adult stuttering treatments. I don't consider myself to be an expert in childhood stuttering treatments. I've certainly read the literature. I know that there's far more children who stutter than adults, particularly preschool children. The LIDCOM program, it has by far the most evidence. So if you have a preschool child, I recommend that you watch some videos about the LIDCOM program. There are many excellent videos. I'm not going to go into that. The first effective stuttering treatment was discovered in 1965 by Israel Golddiamond at the University of Illinois. Golddiamond wanted to see whether he could treat stuttering by punishing stutterers when they stuttered. And the punishment that he used was delayed auditory feedback, which was a big reel-to-reel tape recorder with an extra head, which enabled you to hear your voice back in your ears a fraction of a second after you talked. And hearing your voice delayed like this is really annoying to people who don't stutter. Whenever stutterers stuttered, he switched on the delayed auditory feedback, and the stutterers didn't stutter with the delayed auditory feedback on. In fact, they asked him to leave it on. Golddiamond found this very interesting and abandoned his ideas about punishment and instead explored why delayed auditory feedback made stutterers talk fluently. And it turns out that delayed auditory feedback helps you to slow down by stretching vowels, and as you slow down your speech, you reduce your speech motor activity and you improve your speech motor control. So as I was talking about earlier, stutterers have too much speech motor activity. It turns out that delayed auditory feedback is also increasing your auditory processing, but that was not apparent at the time. So in the late 1960s, early 1970s, William Perkins and colleagues at the University of Southern California explored how to teach stutterers to slow down and to reduce their speech motor activity. And this was called fluency shaping therapy. So it starts with your breathing. You learn to do diaphragmatic relaxed breathing, which is when if you put your hand on your stomach, and when you inhale, your hand goes out, and when you exhale, your hand goes in. Now, if the opposite happens, if your hand goes in when you inhale, your hand goes out when you exhale, that's thoracic breathing, and that's the opposite of relaxing. So after you learn to do relaxed diaphragmatic breathing, then you learn vocal fold awareness, which you put your fingers about here, and you should feel your vocal folds vibrating when you produce vowels and voiced consonants. And you'll feel, if you pay attention, you'll notice your vocal folds stop vibrating between words and when you pause. And also on voiceless sounds like S's. And in actuality, your vocal folds, your phonation, you are starting and stopping your phonation many times a second. And this is what stuttering is. It's the inability to start your phonation. What fluency shaping does is help you with this awareness and control, and teaches you to stretch out your vowels and voice consonants, so you get more phonation and less voiceless sounds. In fact, some versions of fluency shaping even teach you not to use voiceless sounds at all. So it's this called continuous phonation, which sounds a little bit odd because you can't say you can't say P's. You have to substitute B's. You can't say T's. You have to substitute D's. But you sure talk fluently. If you keep one hand on your stomach and your other fingers on your throat, and you make sure that you're breathing using relaxed diaphragmatic breathing, and your vocal folds are continuously phonating, you're not going to stutter. So fluency shaping also, you work on awareness and control to relax your jaw, your lips, and your tongue, which are called your articulators. And most of all, you learn to coordinate everything. So you take a breath, and then you release a little air, and you start vibrating just gently and quietly, and then you increase the loudness of your phonation, and then you use your articulators to talk. There have been many scientific studies of fluency shaping, which have found that the best programs reduce stuttering about 70, maybe 75% for about 70% of stutterers. Now, I was one of the 30% of stutterers for whom fluency shaping didn't work. I could talk beautifully in the speech clinics, but as soon as I stepped out the door, I lost all control of my speech. That's because fluency shaping only treats the overactive speech motor control. It doesn't do anything for the underactive auditory processing or the dopamine dopaminergic activities, which we'll talk about later. So I say fluency shaping is the foundation of stuttering therapy, and all stutterers ought to learn fluency shaping. But don't stop there. There are other treatments you will have to do if you want to become fluent, fully fluent. And if you multiply out 70% by 70%, that's about fluency shaping is about 50% effective. So it's doing a lot, but it's not doing everything. Because a miniaturized device was invented in the late 1970s in Scotland. It was called the Edinburgh Masker. And this device had a throat microphone that you wore here, which analyzed the fundamental frequency of your vocal fold vibrations, and then it synthesized a sine wave matching your vocal fold vibration frequency, which sounded like humming in your ears. So in fact, if you hummed like, you would hear the pitch of the humming change in your earphones. And this device was, about 2,000 or 3,000 Americans bought these Edinburgh maskers, and a lot of people found they were highly effective. I know a man who was an accountant, and he could only get jobs working in backroom accounting where he wasn't allowed to talk to anybody because he stuttered severely. And then in 1982, he bought an Edinburgh masker. It worked so well for him that he got a job as a commodities trader at the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, where he is probably one of the most stressful speaking situations, where you have to be yelling orders immediately. If you pause, you could lose thousands of dollars. And so he did that for some years. Then he went to law school, and now he's a law professor, and he's married and has has twin sons, and he's very happy. And he says the Edinburgh Masker changed his life. There was his life before 1982 and his life after 1982. Other people, on the other hand, found the Edinburgh Masker to be less than effective. In particular, people found the effect that it would start out making them talk fluently, but over time, it would lose effectiveness. And this was because all it did was to increase your auditory processing activity. It did nothing for your overactive speech motor control. So it enabled you to continue to talk with too much muscle movements, and so it enabled you to reinforce. It helped one part of stuttering, but it could reinforce another part of stuttering, which over time made the device ineffective for these people who did not combine did not combine the Edinburgh Masker with fluency shaping. As I'm going to keep saying this, effective stuttering treatments can and should be combined. First, I'm going to talk about the team at East Carolina University in the 1990s, led by Joe Kalinowski, who did a series of studies, maybe 20 scientific studies about different types of altered auditory feedback, both delayed auditory feedback and something that Dr. Kalinowski calls frequency-altered auditory feedback, which is just pitch shifting, which you hear your voice in your ears, you hear your voice in your ears higher, or you hear your voice in your ears lower in pitch. Now, with my small talk has both delayed auditory feedback and pitch shifting. So I'm hearing my voice down about 0.8 octaves, which helps me to relax my breathing and relax my vocal folds. So Dr. Kalinowski and his colleagues found that by combining delayed auditory feedback and pitch shifting, they're getting 70 to 80% effectiveness, immediate reductions in stuttering without slowing down, without training, without speech therapy. They did not do long-term studies. However, there were two studies. Now, in 1992, I read Dr. Kalinowski's original paper, and I wanted one of those devices, so they're not available to buy. So I built one. Changed my life, and my friends in my national stuttering project support group asked me to build devices for them, and that's when I founded Casa Futura Technologies. And we've had two long-term studies of Casa Futura Technologies to delayed auditory feedback devices, both of which found 55% carryover fluency. In other words, after you take off the headphones, you continue to talk fluently, or you continue to talk with improved fluency. So one study was had the stutterers talking 30 minutes a day with the devices for 3 months without speech therapy. And the other study was also about 3 months. Now, that's only a 55% reduction in stuttering in the long term. That's because it wasn't being used, and I believe that when you combine altered auditory feedback devices with fluency shaping, you get more carryover fluency. So I'm talking pretty fluently. My speech isn't perfect. I'm going to put the headphones back on because while I can talk fluently without the small talk device, it's just a lot of work for me to talk fluently. It's even more work for me to stutter. It's just a lot easier if I'm going to do a lot of talking. It's a lot easier if I use the headphones. Okay, so where were we? We were I was going to talk about biofeedback devices. In 1976, Charles Van Riper, on the occasion of his retirement, wrote a wonderful article in which he covered the history of stuttering treatment up to that point, and he speculated about the next 100 years of what would happen for treating stuttering. And he said that the cure for stuttering was going to be biofeedback devices. What biofeedback is, it monitors and displays to the patient a physical or bodily process. So in this case, one of the first biofeedback devices monitored your breathing. That was the computer-aided fluency establishment and trainer, the CAFET system. Other devices monitor your vocal fold vibration. At my company, I have built many biofeedback devices. I love building them. They can be, I find them very effective, but nobody buys them. Not much research has been done with the biofeedback devices. They usually involve wearing some kind of a sensor, a strap around your chest, or some kind of electrodes on your throat or on your jaw. And training is required. The devices don't just instantly make you, talk fluently the way, altered auditory feedback does. You have to learn to use them and practice with them. Now I'm going to talk about a third major neurological component of stuttering, dopamine. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter. It's the neurotransmitter associated with alertness and motivation. And the dopaminergic disorders are Tourette syndrome, obsessive compulsive disorder, and stuttering. What these three dopaminergic disorders have in common is that they are related to stress, that that the behaviors manifest in stressful situations, and that the more you consciously try to not do these behaviors, the more the behaviors manifest. These three dopaminergic disorders are disorders of too much dopamine. There are also disorders of too little dopamine, and that is Parkinson's. On my website, I've written a longer ebook about handling stress for stutterers, but I'm just going to briefly say that there are many types of stress, some of which make you stutter. There are other types of stress that will reduce your stutter or make your stuttering or make you talk fluently, in fact. And there are many ways of handling stress to reduce your stuttering. I'll just talk about one of my favorite ways of reducing stress, which is to tell people that I stutter. And usually when I tell people that I stutter, I don't stutter. So their response is usually, but I don't hear you stuttering. One other psychological aspect of stuttering, which I'm just going to touch on, is social anxiety disorder. This is controversial, is especially controversial how to treat social anxiety disorder in stutterers. Social anxiety disorder is when you have fears of talking to strangers and avoid interacting with people. And one thing that I've observed is that the mild stutterers often have the most social anxiety, and the severe stutterers have the least social anxiety. It's paradoxical. It may be because the mild stutterers are able to hide their stuttering, whereas the severe stutterers, we were never able to hide our stuttering. It's controversial whether stutterers even have social anxiety disorder, or whether we have something else, because the treatment, the ways there's one stuttering clinic where the way they treat the social anxiety disorder is they make the stutterers, they take the stutterers to a shopping mall where they have to go up to strangers and ask them stuttering survey. A psychologist would be horrified at this idea. A person who actually had social anxiety disorder, if you told them to go to a shopping mall and to talk to strangers, they would end up they would have a mental breakdown and then sue the psychologist. But stutterers are able to talk to strangers. So it's not clear whether we actually have social anxiety disorder. Change versus acceptance. This is kind of a debate whether you should, whether you should identify the flaws in yourself and do self-improvement, or whether you should accept yourself as you are and not try to change yourself, which is called acceptance. And in my opinion, you can't do one or the other. You have to do both. That if you accept that if you do something to improve your speech, you'll find that you're much easier to accept yourself, your stuttering, and then you want to do more change to improve your speech, and then you accept yourself more. In particular, the more you improve your speech, the more comfortable you are in talking about stuttering with people and telling strangers that you stutter. Now we've covered 3 major neurological components of stuttering. I'm going to go on to a 4th treatment for stuttering. I highly recommend reading a textbook about motor learning and control. These textbooks don't talk about stuttering, or these textbooks are written for physical therapists, occupational therapists, and sports coaches. But you will see many things that ought to be included in stuttering therapy. Motor learning has three stages. In the cognitive stage, you observe a person doing an activity, such as swinging a golf club or hitting a tennis ball with a tennis racket. In the associative stage, you learn to perform the activity, and usually your coach or your physical therapist will have you perform the activity slowly and gently at first. So you're swinging the tennis racket, your coach will have you hold the racket a certain way and hold your arm a certain way and hold your body and get your body in just the right position, and then you'll slowly swing the tennis racket in a perfect arc. And that is the associative stage in which you learn the right way to perform a motor activity. And at this point, this is pretty much where fluency shaping therapy ends. There's a 3rd stage called the autonomous stage, which is every sports coach knows, but speech therapists seem to have never learned this third stage, in which you move from closed loop motor control to open loop motor control. And with closed loop motor control, probably an excellent example would be threading a needle, in which you look at a needle, you look at a thread, and you move the thread closer to the needle, and you move the thread closer to the needle, and you look, and then you put the thread through the needle. And it's you do it slowly and consciously. That's called closed loop, because you're observing and moving together. Open loop motor control is when you don't think about it. If you're, maybe you're playing tennis, you have your eye, I've got my eye on the ball, and I just swing the tennis racket. I'm not looking at the ball, looking at the racket, moving the ball comes closer. No, I'm just looking at the ball, and I'm moving the racket without looking at the racket and hitting the ball. And so in open loop motor control, we execute motor movements without conscious awareness and control without sensory feedback. And that's what we're doing when we're talking. When we're not talking with fluency shaping therapy. With fluency shaping therapy, we're consciously observing our breathing, consciously observing our vocal fold vibration, slowing down, like threading a needle, so that we can talk fluently. To do the autonomous stage, the third stage of motor learning, you must perform the movement faster and harder. This is how your, what we call muscle memory, that remembers these neural movement patterns. And so you must swing that tennis racket faster and harder, hit that, hit the golf ball faster and harder, while your coach observes you and makes sure you stay with perfect form. So your coach will say, no, you moved your elbow the wrong way, do that over again. Go back to doing it slowly with your elbow in the right positions. Okay, that's perfect. Now you can do it faster and harder. So what would happen if we did, so fluency shaping therapy teaches you to talk slowly and consciously. And you never develop this third stage of autonomous learning where you just effortlessly talk fast without thinking about it, which is the goal of every sports coach, every physical therapist, every occupational therapist, but is not the goal of fluency shaping therapy. So if what I call beyond fluency shaping, what would we do? We would practice talking louder and faster while still using our fluency shaping controls. Practice your speech, do in wordless, rather than doing alternating the fluency shaping and then the fast and hard. So if we say baby, okay, I could, with fluency shaping, we'd go baby. Okay, now we're going to do this hard. Baby. Okay, and it's really great if you do this in an empty auditorium, big auditorium. Try to bounce your speech off the walls, or if you don't have this, Demosthenes went down to the beach and projected his voice over the waves, or what I find is a lot more convenient for most of us is go to a freeway overpass and try to project your voice over the cars. And you'll find you can get much louder than I just got. So this is I found highly effective. There's no published research on this, though. For stuttering, plenty of research on this. Like I said, for physical therapy, occupational therapy, and sports coaching. How much practice you have to do to develop autonomous learning. Found that you had to do about 2 million repetitions before you could do it unconsciously. As they say, I could do this in my sleep. Well, that's unconscious. That's the point we want to get to. If we're talking, how many words, how long does it take us to say 2 million words? And you have to say them all fluently. And it's about 6 months of talking several hours a day, which is tells you that one of the reasons stutters fail in speech therapy is they just don't talk enough. Most stutterers have jobs where they don't have to talk. They have hobbies where they don't have to talk, especially now in the last 5 or 10 years. There's a lot of young people who text like all the time. They don't even talk. They're in the same room with their friend and they're just texting. It's like if you don't talk, it doesn't matter what speech therapy you do, you're never going to reach that autonomous motor learning stage. Your fluent speech is never going to become automatic and effortless. Now I'm going to talk about the 5th treatment for stuttering: medications and supplements. I'm going to start with my favorite medications, which are thiamine, also called vitamin B1, and magnesium. There's only one published scientific study about this. It was published in 1957 with children, young children, and it found that thiamine, they didn't use magnesium. Thiamine made all the children fluent, and then it was an ABA trial. So then they stopped the thiamine. All the children went back to stuttering. Then they put some of the children back onto thiamine, and they stopped stuttering. This study was ignored. I had never heard of it, saw no references to it until about 10 years ago when Martin Schwartz, who's a PhD speech-language pathologist and executive director of the National Center for Stuttering, which was the largest stuttering clinic in the world until he retired, he found this study and replicated it with his adult clients. And he found that thiamine and magnesium made about 1/3 of adults fluent. 2/3 of adults it had no effect on. And I'm lucky. I'm one of the adults for whom thiamine and magnesium is effective. And if I take enough of it, I'm completely fluent. And in fact, I did an hour-long talk about evidence-based stuttering treatments at a state speech-language pathology convention to an audience of about 100 speech-language pathologists, and the president of the state association sat in the front row and heckled me for an hour. And afterwards, many of the speech-language pathologists came up to me, during the day and said that was the most rude, unprofessional behavior they had ever seen. I said, well, but how was my speech? And they said, well, I was completely fluent. And what I do is instead, it's a lot of it's about 1 gram of thiamine and 1 gram of magnesium. I take about half that. I take just enough that either with the device I can talk fluently, or even without the device, if I pay attention to my speech and I relax my breathing and pay attention to my phonation, that I can still talk fluently. If I don't pay attention, I stutter, but it's no big deal. So I just take kind of a medium amount of thiamine and magnesium. And as I said, I sure would like to see some scientific investigation of why a third of adults, it just seems to flip a switch in our brains, and a third of adults, it doesn't do anything. I did see a neuroscientist explain what thiamine and magnesium is doing in the brain. It was way beyond me. I'll just say he did say this is regarded as a known effect for treating some neurological disorders. But I will say, let's talk here about what is evidence-based practice. At the start, I said evidence-based practice is treatments that have been proven effective in a scientific study published in a peer-reviewed journal. Well, there's a lot of bias about which treatments get studied and which treatments don't get studied. My company's altered auditory feedback devices have been the subject of more than 20 studies, which is great. I love it. Whereas many stuttering treatments have had maybe one study or very few. There's a bias towards altered auditory feedback devices because they're so easy. You just put them on and the stutterers talk fluently, or talk with reduced stuttering. It's easy to measure that. So the researchers, are usually graduate students, are able to easily do a study and to get the results right away, and then publish those results in a journal, and they can graduate and go on and get a job. Whereas if you're doing something like fluency shaping therapy, which takes months, weeks or months to complete a therapy program, and then there's all the follow-ups, and I mean, it can take years to collect all the data, and then it's hard to with fluency shaping therapy, it's harder to measure the results, and to do a study of fluency shaping therapy, you will not get your research project done soon. You will not get it published soon. It's going to take you another 10 years before you graduate, and your advisor will tell you not to do it, to pick something else. So that's a bias, as I said, in favor of altered auditory feedback. Well, so there's bias against there's other areas of speech therapy which may be very effective, but simply nobody's studied them because they're hard to study, because it's going to take a long time. Now, thiamine and magnesium, the results show up within a few days, usually within a week or two at the most. So that's not an issue. The problem here is that nobody can make a profit from, thiamine and magnesium. You just go down to the drugstore and you buy a bottle. It's like $5, and unlike pharmaceuticals companies, which will spend millions to test one of their patented drugs, which even if there's little likelihood that the drug will have any effect on stuttering, they'll still spend millions on a study. And if they find any result at all, they'll market it and they'll try to make millions of dollars from it. So you see, there have been quite a few studies of patented medications, very expensive studies, and I'll show you they have had universally no effects or bad effects, whereas the stuff you can buy down at the drugstore, there's almost no research on. So, but I will argue that if a treatment is cheap, easy, fast, there's no time involved with thiamine and magnesium. There's no side effects. You can take as much as you want. Your body just gets rid of what it doesn't need. The standard of evidence, in my opinion, can be much lower than a treatment that is expensive and time-consuming and maybe dangerous. So I tell people, try thiamine and magnesium. If it works for you, great. If it doesn't, you lost $5. Now let's talk about prescription medications. These are almost all medications that reduce dopamine. You remember I talked about how stuttering is one of the dopaminergic disorders in which we have too much dopamine, or a part of our brain is too sensitive to dopamine. So that appears to be the case, that our speech motor control area is too sensitive to dopamine. And these medications include risperidone, which is trade name Risperdal. Another one is olanzapine, which is trade name Zyprexa. The first one was haloperidol, which is trade named Haldol. That came out years ago, 1970s. One of my friends, who is a extremely severe stutterer, he tried that, and after taking the Haldol for a few days, one night he found his head kept moving 180 degrees slowly side to side, and there was nothing he could do to stop his head from moving side to side. And he thought this was a pretty scary thing. So he stopped taking Haldol, and he said it had no effect on his speech anyway. Haldol is notorious for having really not good side effects. The modern dopamine antagonists include, as I said, Risperdal and Zyprexa, and they have plenty of side effects, such as weight gain. The effects of these dopamine antagonist medications on speech are minimal. That's the five evidence-based treatments for stuttering. I'll just make some rules of thumb you can use. First of all effective evidence-based stuttering treatments can be combined. If we have one treatment that reduces your speech motor overactivity, such as fluency shaping, and you have another treatment that increases your auditory processing underactivity, such as altered auditory feedback, and another treatment that helps your dopamine, such as thiamine and magnesium, I recommend doing all the treatments, because stuttering is not one neurological abnormality in your brain. It is at least 3. If a speech therapist tells you that they have the one treatment for stuttering, this is the only effective treatment for stuttering, and you should not do any other stuttering treatments, get a different speech therapist. Another rule of thumb is that if there's a new stuttering treatment and the foundations and the PhD speech language pathologist stuttering experts hate it, the more they hate it, the more likely it's an effective treatment. I'll talk about why this this is, and we'll go back to the old days of when the days of the great men. This started in the 1920s and going to reach its peak in the 1950s, when if you were a stutterer, you would take a train across the country to some small town. It was usually a small town with a state university, not the main state university, but sort of one of the others, where there was a great man, and you would live there for weeks or months, and you would learn pearls of wisdom from the great man, and then eventually you would leave a better person. You'd still stutter, of course. The scientific studies of these treatments, that these therapies that these great men came up with, found they're all completely useless. This has been a long video. I hope you've learned something. There's a lot more to talk about, and if you have any further questions, you can go to my website, read my blog. You'll probably find the answer there. If not, feel free to email me or call me. I love to talk about stuttering.